encourage everyone to just share in the chat if you feel called where you're signing on from today. I know we've got international members to this community now, so I always love seeing where everybody is joining from. I am joining today from Maui. Aloha, it's good to be here. And with us today, in addition to the Fearless Foundry team, we have Kelly Campbell. And for those of you who don't know Kelly yet, I am so excited to introduce her to you. She is a dear friend. She is an amazing founder, creator, coach, really inspiration to leadership work in general. I'm really, really proud to know her and to bring this work to our community. And I've been looking forward to this session for quite some time. So Kelly, I'm so grateful for you. Also, I want to let you all know if you've got something beautiful in the mail from this community. That was courtesy of Kelly. That was her gift to all of you. So make sure to pop that out, take some notes as we move through today. But Kelly, the keys to the kingdom are yours. Take us away.
Well, I do like to be in the driver's seat, as I'm sure most of your community will resonate with. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and start talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is conscious leadership. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah? Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to talk to the Finding Fearless community today and excited that all of you were able to join. I think originally when we talked about this workshop, it was kind of like how to become a conscious leader. But the more that I was putting the presentation together and drawing from new information and all of the things that I've been personally learning over the course of time, I think the idea of developing the foundations of conscious leadership became a little bit more resonant, because it's one thing to understand like what conscious leadership is or to have some sense about what it might be. And it's another thing to actually take action, right? And so I feel like with the Finding Fearless community, it is about action, right? Like, yes, we have to have our sit in our being energy and also our doing energy. But I think we can pretty often get stuck in this situation where we're learning about new topics, we're kind of going down the Google rabbit holes, but how to actually apply that in our daily lives, I think is really important. So with that said, how many of you, with a little show of hands, are feeling super overwhelmed? Maybe even there's a little touch of imposter syndrome, right? Because that creeps up on probably the daily for some people. Sometimes we feel like this was a great graphic that I found on Unsplash. We feel like we're being pulled in many directions from our spouses, maybe our kids, if you're a mom, our employees, right? Market demands, competitors that are coming into our arena or in our domain. We just feel like we're like being pulled in multiple directions. And there's this idea that we have to like have all the answers and we have to do it all. And we have to use fear-based tactics to get people to do what we want them to do, whether it's at home or in a social group or, within our companies. And I think that this is something that we really need to address and we really need to talk about, because not enough people talk about this. What you see on Instagram, the hustle culture, the like crush it, like all of this leaning into that more, what I might call like a toxic masculine energy, is really unhealthy. And so I think embodying more of this feminine energy, this like, you know what, let me gather myself back together, put all my pieces back together and actually start to live an integrated life. That's kind of what we're talking about today. So I'm going to ask you a question. What is conscious leadership? And I would love for you to actually enter your own definition into the chat. And Elgelin, if you want to kind of call some of those out as they're coming in, I think it's really important for us to level set and figure out where each of us are at with our understanding of what conscious leadership is, right? Because like consciousness is a very sort of ethereal term. It's something that people have a really hard time like grasping or understanding. And then you start to add leadership to that, right? Like, what do we mean by conscious leadership? So really curious to hear if there's anyone who has a definition, whatever comes to you, whatever you think, the answer might be for you. And the reality is that this answer could be different for everyone. Everyone has a slightly different spin on what it might mean to them. You have any
So
answers there?
far, so far we have, I can't see their full names, but we have bringing our whole selves to our business. I think that was Mindy.
That's great, Mindy.
And then another one was leaning into our own healing to help others elevate their abilities.
Oh my God, I love that.
And that looks like that was Madeline.
Good one.
And then LE, there's feeling into resonant interdependence and encouraging others to do the same.
Oh my God, these are great. I am definitely in the right room.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to share with you my definition, and I want to be super clear that this is just my definition, okay? My definition of conscious leadership, which is the area of, what I do as a coach, is the practice, notice the word that I'm using, the practice by which a leader heals, number one, develops self-awareness, number two, builds a culture of we, so not me, but we, and becomes radically responsible for the people and planet while running sustainably. I know that that's a mouthful, but what I want to highlight are these, couple of little things here. It's really about healing, number one. We're going to get into all of this in a much deeper level, but healing, number one, becoming more self-aware of how you show up in the world, what words you use, what your behaviors are, what actions can you pause to catch yourself before you repeat a pattern. Like that's what we're talking about with self-awareness. Building a culture of we, here we're talking specifically about that conscious culture development, right? Where it's less about individualism and like, what can I get? What's in it for me? And more about how can the entire community, how can the whole team thrive? And then becoming radically responsible for people and planet while running sustainably is really the triple bottom line. A lot of people who have understood or been drawn to conscious capitalism or have been a certified B Corp, those are the people who I would be preaching to the choir, right? Like they understand that the triple bottom line of like people and environment or community and profit are all equal to one another. They understand that that's possible. There's a huge majority of people who think that that's like pie in the sky. And hopefully that's one of the takeaways today that I can change your mind a little bit about. If you are a little skeptical about whether that's actually true or not. Okay. So a couple of questions you might have off the bat before we dive into this. Okay, why does it matter? Like, why should I care about this? And how does it actually impact my business? So we started out talking about overwhelm, right? We all feel overwhelmed, especially as women or people who identify as female, especially if you're in a founder role or a leader role. So in order to combat that overwhelm, conscious leadership actually helps with creating an exemplary life work integration, meaning you're setting an example for everyone else who's on your team or in your family or in your community group that you don't have to live as two separate entities, a business persona and a personal persona. Number two, why it matters is because imposter syndrome sucks. It's the worst thing in the world. And all it is really an invention of our mind, right? So if you look at what imposter syndrome, the roots of it, what it is the fear, and we're going to get into this stuff. So don't worry if I'm going too fast or feel like I might be touching on some edges here. It's the fear that we might actually not be worthy or might not be valuable, or the products or services that we offer may not be. And the fear that someone's going to find out that we've been like kind of faking it, right? That is not a place that you want to live. Talk about anxiety. A lot of people they really want to have a better, more invitational communication style. They just don't know how to. They don't know how to change the language. It's really easy to listen to a podcast or read a book that talks about, or even be in therapy and listen to the language that your therapist is using and be like, man, I really wish that I could talk like that to my team or my spouse or whatever. But the reality is it's really hard to do it in practice. So this is also what conscious leadership brings to us, brings to the table. When we're talking about team building, conscious leadership gives us completely new success metrics. So it's not just about the profit margin, right? We're not just focusing on that. We're not just focusing on like, man, all of these team members, they only work 9 to 5. They don't understand what it's like for me to like grind and like be taking home less than, some of them. There's completely different success metrics when we're talking about team building from a conscious leadership standpoint. The other thing, and if you listen to the Instagram live that Madeline and I did last week, is that this is not negotiable. This is not an option. The reason for that is that social pressure and market pressure, meaning your consumers, your customers, are both demanding this. So conscious leadership is now an expectation. It's not a, should I do this or should I not, right? It's actually expected, because if you think about it, the people who are on your team, regardless of the size of your team, could be one person, could be contractors, could be 100 full-time employees or more. Those people want to align with your values. They want to know that they're seen, heard, valued, understood. Those are the reasons why they're going to join your team and want to be mentored by you. From the customer standpoint, people can buy services or products anywhere. They want to know that who they're buying from has some kind of like greater good component to it, right? And then this last part is about sustainability, because at the end of the day, you're all business owners. You're all about that paper. I understand that you have bills to pay and you want to pay your people really well, right? This idea that money follows value. I'm going to focus a little bit more on this because this is super important, especially when we talk about the triple bottom line. What I mean by money follows value is that if you look at this kind of loop, when you focus on making sure that your employees, number one, are feeling valued and supported, what does that do? That leads to more engagement on their behalf, more productivity, more loyalty, less turnover, right? And then what does that lead to? That means that the work that they're providing for your clients and customers is just better, right? Like if they're more engaged, the work is just better because they're passionate, they're feeling fulfilled, they're getting compensated well. They know that they are like valued really deeply as a human being at this company. It's less disruption to the business when you don't have that employee turnover. All of that sort of allows trust to accumulate between leader or leaders, employees, and the clients. The last loop of that is that profitability is a lagging indicator. So if you focus on the employees first and make sure that they have everything that they need, naturally, if you follow this loop, it will lead to expanded client engagements, higher revenue, better retention, and better, I would say, more ideal referrals from your existing clients, and higher profit margins, right? This is not something that I'm just inventing. This is like fact. This is proven. This is how it works. So beyond that, why should it matter, right? We talked about why it matters to you, why it matters to your business, but that's not all there is in the world, right? The other thing that conscious leadership will impact are your personal relationships, right? Could you imagine that as you get more dialed into who you are, who you have the possibility or potential of becoming, a more invitational communication style, more self-worth, more self-confidence, all of these things, your personal relationships are also going to feel the impact of that, because you're going to be able to set better boundaries. You're going to be able to advocate for yourself more. You're going to be able to live a happier, more fulfilled life. Beyond you, your employees' families, think about the impact there. Maybe you have an employee who is a single mom, right? The ability for you to follow in such a way where you are really focusing on equity and paying your employees and valuing them, that also translates to like what their kids see, right? Like, oh, mom is worth this because her employer believes this about her and supports her in all these different ways, right? And she's happy, not every day, but most of the time she's happy, she's fulfilled. That translates, like kids pick up on that, spouses pick up on that. You have no idea what you're doing for their families. Maybe from a compensation standpoint, they're actually more financially well off and can maybe send their kids to a better school or whatever the case may be, right? So there's impact way beyond just you and your business. Think about your community. As a conscious leader, giving back to the community is a really important piece of this. So how does that impact your community? I'll give you an example. When I had my agency, I had a cause marketing agency for 14 years. I was so into like community give back, and we didn't make like a ton of money. We were not a $10 million agency, but we had enough to be able to spread that wealth in our direct community. So we did things like we did free ad campaigns for the local animal shelter to help with their adoption awareness. We volunteered at a local food pantry, which I still volunteer at 7 years later because I loved it so much. We raised money for them and started volunteering to the point where I would give my employees a couple of hours off each week to be able to go and volunteer there, which was right across the street from our office. There are ways that you can impact your community and make that direct impact without, needing to really spend a ton of money or give large contributions. So your direct impact to the community is really important. And then think about, I think actually Fearless Foundry does a really good job of this, not to plug you shamelessly. But I think domain disruption, right? Like if you talk about, I know Madeline talked about at some point when you guys were putting together your legal contracts and your like employee agreements and benefits plans and things like that. You looked at what was out there and you were like, none of this makes sense for us, right? Like this is all clearly written by someone who has never had children or just like doesn't understand what it's like to be a new mom or whatever. So you wrote into your employee agreements and benefits things that made more sense for you. And what you maybe didn't realize that when you did that, you were actually being very disruptive in the marketing agency space. You are modeling for other people that like, you don't have to download those templates and just agree to what they have. That language is for someone else, right? Someone who's not conscious. So by bringing that consciousness to all of these little nuanced pieces of your business, you are actually disrupting, whether you knew it or not, the industry or the domain that you're in. Environmental impact is a big one. Whether you have products or services that could potentially cause harm to the environment or not, you have the opportunity to do simple things like making sure that you have a recycling program at your office if you have one, or whatever the case may be. You can definitely do things like a 1% for the planet. I know a lot of agencies that I work with, they have that as one of their give back initiatives. So lots and lots of different ways to help, because there is no planet B, as they say. I think the biggest one is you have the ability to really dismantle systemic isms, right? Like here, the easiest one to talk about is systemic racism. If you can really understand unconscious bias and become more self-aware and bake all of those things, an inclusive culture, create an inclusive culture so that everything across the board that you do as a creative or in marketing or advertising or whatever your business is, if you can bring more awareness and more consciousness to your talent acquisition, the campaigns that you run, the talent that you might hire to be included in those, right? The stock photos that you purchase, every single little tiny thing that you do across the board and even having like uncomfortable conversations in the workplace, which I'm a huge fan of. These are ways that you can actually directly impact the dismantling of some systemic isms. So we haven't even gotten into it yet. So let's do this and we can do it together. The meat of this are what I'm calling the 7 core foundations of conscious leadership. The first one is self-awareness. And this is kind of just like a little table of contents. So we're going to get into these one by one. Self-awareness, mindfulness, shadow work and healing. If you haven't heard of some of these things, that's okay. I will explain them. Self-care and what I call self-fullness, reframing and reflection, trusting and empowering others, and a greater good responsibility. So let's go into self-awareness first. So one of my favorite lines, because I think it's so true, is empathy is the result of self-awareness, right? We've all heard of empathy from maybe people like Brene Brown or Michael Ventura, or some of these people who have brought empathy, Simon Sinek maybe, empathy to the forefront as like, if you're going to be a good leader, you should really have empathy. Well, that's really hard to achieve if you're not self-aware. What I mean by self-awareness is, do you have the ability, and you can ask yourself these things as we go through. Do you believe that you have the ability, when you're in conversation or when you're in some experience, do you have the ability to pause and recognize how you are showing up, recognize what behaviors or thoughts or emotions are coming to the surface for you? Can you actually regulate that emotion? I want to be super clear here. I am not talking about pushing away emotion. I think that being invitational about emotion is the only way forward. When I say emotional regulation, I mean, am I able to recognize that, like, hey, okay, there's something coming up for me. I'm able to like voice it or at least name it, because, you know, obviously you can't always have those conversations depending upon what your culture is at your workplace. But you can probably have those conversations in your personal life with friends or spouse or things like that. So regulating that emotion to say, okay, this is happening. I feel it. I feel angry right now. I feel really sad by that. I feel disappointed. I'm really afraid right now. Being able to like not repress those things, but actually let them rise to the surface and not distract yourself, but actually lean into them a little bit more. Let them just be, let them exist, like welcome them to the table. Um, Self-awareness is also about honesty and living in integrity, because there is nothing better. Nothing feels better than living in integrity. Trust me, I can tell you. I've been on both sides of it. I'm sure that because we're all human, we've both been on all sides of that. Self-awareness is also about communication and being really, really crystal clear with your communication. Exhibiting boundaries, really healthy boundaries, right? I know Madeline on her Instagram, sometimes like her stories, she'll post different things about what healthy boundaries sound like or look like. And I think if you've never gone through the process of understanding what that language sounds like to like enact a healthy boundary, right? I think that could be an exploratory area for you, right? So quick example might be if someone says, hey, I'd love for you to do this thing. Like, hey, are you able to do this thing, right? Come on a podcast or work on this project or whatever it is. If you literally don't have the time or the energy or the desire to do that, it's really okay to say, you know what? I'm actually not able to commit to that right now. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm grateful for it. And I'm going to have to respectfully decline that. You know, let's touch base in 3 months or 6 months where my schedule might open up and we can revisit that again. There's nothing wrong with saying that. That's like a really healthy boundary. And what that does is it shows the other person that you actually value your time. You are very clear about the things that you want in your life and the things that you don't want in your life at this moment. And it actually does another thing. It models to them that you can say no, right? I love saying no. I have a post-it note, a post-it pad on my desk, and I keep track every day of all the things I said no to. I love it because I get excited. I'm like, what more can I add to this list? It's great. You can gamify it like that. The last thing with self-awareness, and of course there are many, many more, this is not an exhaustive list, but self-awareness means that you're actually aligning your ideals, your values, your core values with your actions. That's kind of what we also mean by integrity. So practicing, I said at the beginning, conscious leadership is a practice. Self-awareness is a practice. It's a discipline. It is something that you try and fail at and try again and fail at, and you continually practice this. It becomes a lifestyle or a mindset shift. How much more self-aware can I get? A lot of us do this. We lead in this way where we think, just because of society, we think that as the leader, we have to know all the answers, right? And we have to be the first one in the morning and the last one in to leave. And everything is on our shoulders. Meanwhile, what's happening behind you? Your whole team is like, hey, where are you? Right? Like, you don't have to do that. If you're self-aware, this never happens. If you're self-aware, you're much more engaged with your team. You're much more collaborative, right? So one of the other ways that we can practice conscious leadership is to actually just slow down. And I know that this sounds crazy because you're building, you're growing, you're scaling, right? You're like all in. And I'm going to give you a little secret. You can actually go much farther, much faster if you slow down. And it sounds antithetical, but when you start to reconnect with your own intuitive intelligence, you stop asking every other external resource for the answers. The only way that you can actually tap into that is if you just slow down. So there's a little note here. Most of us trust other people, our gurus, our coaches, our therapists, books, courses. We spend thousands and thousands of dollars on trying to get answers from everybody else. And by the way, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to therapy and read books and all those things. But what I am saying is that tapping in and being able to actually trust your own intuition is the most powerful thing that you can do as a founder, as a business leader, as a human, to be honest. If we can actually get out of our own heads and disconnect from these self-limiting beliefs, you can do it through meditation. You can do it through whatever you determine is mindfulness for you. We are going to find that a lot of those answers already live in our body. What's happened over time from childhood onward is that we have been taught, we've been conditioned, we've been programmed to believe that what's inside of us is not trustworthy. Think about that for a second, right? But it is trustworthy. There's just all this other stuff on top of it. It's kind of like, if you buy an old house and you have to scrape through tons and tons of layers of paint, every single homeowner before you just painted another coat, another coat, another coat. You actually get down and what's there? It is this beautiful original wood grain, right? That's intuition. The other thing, I just want to pause there for a second and ask if there are any questions, because I feel like I'm hitting you with a lot of stuff and this is going to get even deeper. So I just want to pause there. Elgilin, if there's any questions or anything that are coming up in the chat.
I'll make an ask of you, Kelly, just to get a little personal here for a second, because we gave all of our community members access to Headspace as part of access to the Finding for this community, and that's been something that's been very helpful for me, and I think helpful to anyone who's new to meditation. But can you share a little bit about what your mindfulness practice looks like in action?
Yeah, sure. So I am fortunate enough to where I live right now, I have a separate dedicated space. It's just a small, tiny room where I literally just like light some incense. If it's at night, I'll light some candles just because that feels good to me. Um, and I sit and I meditate. And so what that means to me is like, I'm not, the intention is not to clear my head out, right? The intention is just like, I'm there to notice, I'm there to observe. If I could actually just like do a little bit of breath work to like drop in, close my eyes, and just see like what is actually coming up for me, right? Because like what's coming up is sometimes just like monkey mind, monkey brain stuff where it's like, oh, I gotta write out my grocery list and I've got to remember to do this tomorrow because my friends are coming over, right? Like that's just monkey mind stuff. Instead of pushing that stuff away, what I do is I let it happen. I let it come to the forefront. I say thank you, and then I kind of swipe it away, right? Like I acknowledge it. I'm not trying to shame myself for having those thoughts. But once I can clear those away and I kind of give gratitude, like, okay, thank you for that reminder. Next one, next one. Then I finally, after maybe 5 or 10 minutes, I can like drop in a little bit deeper. And for me, what happens is like, just on a physical level, I start to get some kind of like tingling feeling in my head. And I almost feel a little bit of a disconnection or a disassociation between like my body and like where my mind is kind of like floating, if that makes sense. Everybody has a different experience of mindfulness meditation. But that works for me. I've also used the Muse headset. Um, uh, there's lots of different things that you can do. And I want to be clear too, that you don't have to have a separate room or a specific time per day. Some people just, meditate or have a mindfulness practice. Um, that kind of just works for them based on their schedule. When I am doing conscious leadership coaching, I do a mindfulness practice with my clients at the beginning of every call. So I'll literally like just guide them through a little bit of breath work. I make them take their shoes and socks off, root their bottoms of their feet down onto either like a stool or the bottom of like the floor underneath them. And then we just do a couple of breaths together, changes the whole landscape. And that's mindfulness. That's just like setting an intentional, like, we're going to create this space so that all the other chaos that's floating around right now can actually just like pause and move away from us for a little bit. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my practice.
Yeah, it's super beautiful and helpful to hear that, because I mean, I think the thing about the practice is it has to be something that's your own, and you can just hear in everything that Kelly shared, like the level of intention she's putting into that. And I'd be curious, for anyone that feels called to share in the chat, like what your mindfulness practice looks like. Like mine currently is like a morning meditation in my closet because that's a place I can hide from my kids with a locked door. Um, but I know for others this might look like a gratitude journal or some other kind of ritual thing that you can return to on a regular basis that improves the quality of your day and gives you this space to kind of reflect and clear a little bit. So encourage anyone who feels called to share their mindfulness practice in the chat. But that was the only question, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. Anything going on in the chat before I keep going? Okay. So now we get into what I think are sort of like the crux of conscious leadership, or at least the pretty deep foundation of it. Healing trauma, and we all have trauma of all different brands and shapes and sizes, but it's all trauma to us. For me, this is the key to effective leadership. I've even gone so far as to say that in order to be an effective leader, you have to be self-aware and healing. And I use the healing word, ing, not healed in the past tense, because healing is an ongoing work, right? When I say trauma, I'm talking about childhood wounding. I'm talking about emotional and psychological wounding. For some people, that could look like, verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. For other people, it could literally just mean not having your needs met the way that you needed them to be met when you were a little kid. And that could be for a million reasons, right? Like whatever your caregiver structure looked like, how present those people were, how the tools that they had, right, at their disposal, how healed or traumatized they were. None of us, to be very clear and to level set this, none of us have escaped childhood unscathed. And I think that's really important. We're all literally in the same boat. And one person's trauma is not more or less, or it's just different, right? There's a whole spectrum out there. And there's no judgment around it. The only thing that we have to know is that every single one of us has trauma. I have trauma. Every single person on this call has trauma. Shadow work, if you're not familiar with it, is based on Carl Jungian's theory that we have a shadow side. And it's not a theory, we know we have a shadow side. Quick example of a shadow side would be a conscious leadership coaching client of mine who is an agency owner, happens to be a male. We were working together for a couple of years, and he came to me and he said, listen, I am at the point where I just like trust you implicitly. And I have this thing that I have to share with you that like I'm really embarrassed about. And I don't want you to think differently of me. And I don't think that you will, because of like who you are and what you do. But I am like severely, severely worried that when I go to bring a new baby into the world, and his wife was pregnant at the time, I don't know if I can be a good father because I have a porn addiction. And I really would love your help like working through that shadow side. Now, to be clear, I'm not a therapist, but I have at least a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in dealing with things of the shadow in my personal life, and also after 5 years of being a conscious leadership coach. So when I say I've seen it all, I've heard it all, there's no judgment. Trauma is real. When we went back and realized what actually had happened in that particular instance with that coaching client, it was because there was an instance in his childhood where his mom was dating this man. You know, she was in a new relationship, and the man had like a Playboy or something hidden under his bed. So Michael finds it and basically was found reading this Playboy, right? Normal, natural thing. Every little boy and many little girls do that, right? But because of the parents' reaction, he was taught that that was a shameful, dirty, really, really bad thing. And what happens in that instance, we take that experience, that memory, it gets lodged in our body. We push it so far down. And how does it manifest? As an adult, we're like now addicted to this thing that we think is bad and we're ashamed of it and all of these things, right? So that's a quick kind of strange example, but I think it's really poignant, right? And this could show up in lots of different ways in our lives. But shadow work is really this idea that you dive back into these little minute moments, these experiences, these memories, could be minute, could be very, very large, as I said before, could have been something that spanned years, could have been related to a particular person, like in my case, my mother. Um, from 0 to 16, like I was in it, super traumatized, verbally, mentally, physically, like that's my story. And so that's why I lean so far into this. And I'm very comfortable being vulnerable about that, because had I not had that experience and had I not really dived pretty deeply into the healing work, ing, it's never over, I couldn't be standing here in front of you today, right? So we all have things like this. Um, Neuroplasticity, if you've never heard that term, is the brain's ability to change and adapt as the result of new experience. So shadow work basically goes kind of like dives into these experiences or these memories or events, um, and kind of tries to highlight what the reality was versus what your little version of yourself experienced in that moment. And it tries to rewrite the narrative, right? Like, so you are the hero, you are in total control of this. But essentially what we're doing is we're rewiring and reparenting ourselves to provide what the smaller version of us needed. Ultimately, we're changing those like really false and really damaging narratives um, that were caused by this wounding. And think about, you know, if there are things that you are kind of aware of that you're like, ooh, you're really pushing an edge for me right now. Like, I'm kind of aware of what you're talking about, but I don't want to look at it. Well, that's your intuition. Like, yeah, it might be time to really talk about that, right? It might be time to start the healing journey for that. So I bring this up because for me, in the work that I understand, and if you talk to anyone who's in conscious leadership as a practice or a coach or a consultant or anything in that realm, it's trauma. It comes down to trauma and healing that. So I'll leave that there because I don't want to go too far down the road. But again, just like narrowing in, if there's one thing that you could take away from that portion of the 7 core foundations, is like, maybe it's time to like zero in on exactly what that primary wounding was, because there's probably a primary wound and then I would say multiple other wounds around that, or things that just reconfirmed or affirmed that over the course of your life. But try to narrow in on that. And again, I'll leave that there. This next part is about self-care and self-fullness. So there's a great Rumi quote, one of my favorite Persian poets, that says, "Give not from the depths of your well, but from your overflow." And the idea there is that you really want to set a healthy example. if you are the type of founder that is constantly working, right? You're in that hustle, grind, Instagram life, and you don't tend to all the aspects of your own health and well-being, not only is that not healthy for you, and you already know that, but what you're doing is you're actually signaling to those who are under your stewardship, under your care, that that is actually what you expect from them, right? That's actually what you're doing. You're creating a toxic culture without knowing it. And that culture is one of overwhelm as the norm. If you, at the beginning of this, you raised your hand and said, I'm overwhelmed, I have the imposter syndrome, I'm anxious, like these are things that I feel on a daily basis. Well, if you are not taking care of yourself, you're not just experiencing those things for yourself. You're also telling your team that that's the expectation in your culture, right? So think about that. If you don't want to change it or can't change it or can't see a way out of changing it for yourself, then do it from an altruistic perspective. Do it from the perspective of, I don't want to set that tone for my culture, right? I want my people to feel fulfilled and valued and healthy and set strong boundaries and have paid time off and all of that. How many of you are familiar with the oxygen mask theory? You've seen it on anytime you fly, right? I love this. It's not a theory, it's a fact. There's a reason why you put the oxygen mask on someone else. On yourself first before you put it on someone else. And a lot of people think about that from the standpoint of being selfish, right? Like, oh, if you're thinking about yourself, that's really egoic. That's individualism. You're like focusing on me before anybody else. No, that got a bad rap, right? When you're talking about taking care of yourself, you got to reframe that because it's not selfish, it's self-full, right? As I said before, this like self-sacrifice, I was so guilty of this when I had my agency. I was there at 7 a.m., left at 7 p.m. I would come in on the weekends to clean the office. I don't know. It was like, I don't know why I was doing all these things. I was killing myself. I tacked on 40 pounds over the course of 14 years having my agency. I was really unhealthy. My marriage was suffering, right? It was total self-sacrifice. I don't know. It was like some martyrdom or something. But what that actually was doing without me realizing it was I was alienating my own people. They were like, I can never give as much as she gives. I'm not going to get here before 9 and stay after 5. Like, what about my life? Right. So there's such a disconnect between what you're showing when you self-sacrifice and what your people think that you expect of them. The other big one for me, and I think this is really important, is that when you're talking about trust amongst team members, people distrust those that they cannot rely on. And if you are grinding and you're constantly like late for meetings and you're overbooked and you're, again, self-sacrifice all day long, there are going to be things that slip through the cracks, right? When is the last time that you actually promised one of your team members or someone in your organization that you were going to do something and then it slipped through the crack? You just totally forgot because you have so much shit on your plate that you just forgot. We all do it, right? Well, that's fine if it happens once, but you know the reality. It didn't happen once. It happened twice or 3 times or 4 times or 8 times just this week, right? If your people start to realize that if I ask her for this thing, like there's a 50-50 shot that it's going to get done. Think about what that does, right? They can't rely on you, so they're not going to trust you. And the last part of this is people want to be inspired. You're their mentor, you're their leader. An empty cup, if you are totally drained and just not taking care of yourself, and it's super obvious to everybody, that is not inspiring. Like, you can do better. And what that means by doing better is doing less, slowing down and doing less. Put the oxygen mask on yourself. Then you can take care of everybody else, right?
So Kelly, I want to call in something that came through in the chat because I really think it's worth pausing for. And Cecily, I want to shout out to you for always being so vulnerable in your shares. But Cecily shared with us, she said this is why she is scared to hire people. She's on the verge of kind of her first hiring process, and she feels like she's a crappy leader because of kind of the things that you're sharing here. And, you shared vulnerably, Kelly, that like this is something you struggled with as well. And so for anyone who's hearing this and then maybe getting a little down on themselves, because I shared in the chat, it brought up for me, like, yeah, this martyrdom thing is really real. What would you offer to Cecily when she's hearing this and worrying, she's going to struggle to hire people because she feels like she's not necessarily taking care of herself, and that makes her a bad leader?
Yeah. So first of all, what I hear in that question, thank you for the question, but what I hear in it is shame. There's shame built into that, right? There's fear and there's shame. I am afraid to hire this new person because I already created a narrative that I'm going to be a bad leader because I don't take care of myself, or that I'm going to, create this like toxic culture of overwhelm. Number one, congratulate and celebrate the fact that you're at a place in your career, in your organization, where you can hire your first employee. That is like buying your first house. It is huge. It is like monumental. Celebrate that. Celebrate the small wins along the way. The second thing I would say is why, this is a question, why are you already creating a narrative, or why are you reinforcing a false or damaging narrative that you will automatically be a bad leader, right? That's a question, just to reflect that back at you. If you recognize that you are not taking care of yourself, that's self-awareness. There's another little like, celebrate that. There are tons of people in this world who are completely not self-aware at all. The fact that you are self-aware shows me that, like, and the fact that you're even on this presentation today, this workshop, like, you're interested in learning and growing and healing. Just lean into that. You're fine. You're fine. And also, are you going to make mistakes? Are you going to fuck up as a leader? 100%. You just expect that. And what you do is you get better and you get better. For the first 7 years of owning my agency, I describe it as me groping my way along because I did not know what the hell I was doing. I made all the mistakes that you can imagine, right? I mean, I can't even go into all of them. There were so many, but like, you grope your way along, right? Like, trial and error, you figure it out, you get resources, you attend things like this, you read books. I have some book recommendations for you at the end of this. You're gonna be fine. What I would say is just really hone in on this question of like, can you reframe the narrative that you will automatically be a bad leader? Because I actually don't think that that's true. And the more people that you surround yourself with, like this community, that also don't believe that that's true, what starts to change, right? So that's my answer to that.
And I also just want to throw in there, I can't even tell you the number of self-aware, unqualified leaders that are running around in the world going, I'm amazing at leadership, and are
Right.
totally toxic and are not asking these questions, and really it is about putting in this work, which you're already showing up to do. So yeah,
Yep.
thank you, Kelly. And Cecily shared in the chat just now, she said, it really helped when Madeline said, just keep showing up. And there was a lot of like, just agreement to everything you're saying here, Kelly. So
Good.
thank you.
Good. I love to hear that. All right. So the next part of this is, it's actually a great segue. Reframing and reflection. So instead of reacting or being reactive, how can we pause and dial up our curiosity? So this is like super self-aware stuff. This is like, in a particular moment, and this all happens like within milliseconds. So just like stay with me for a second. So you are pausing, you're reframing, like, oh, I wonder, and then there are some questions I'll get to in a second. I wonder if I can have more curiosity than I can have reaction, right? So these questions, so what I'm talking about is in the middle of a conversation. This is the hard stuff. How can you change your behavior, your communication style, your reactivity in a moment? There are 3 questions that I ask every single time I don't like the word triggered, but every single time I find emotion is arising, and I want to have a reactive response, I ask myself all three or one of these questions. What is this experience meant to teach me? Now, to be fair, this question is probably one of the questions I'll ask later on when I'm like journaling or thinking about it or talking with one of my coaches or whatever. But what is this experience meant to teach me? Can I reframe? And this is like high level shit. Like reframing in the moment, that's like where you want to get to. Second question is this experience mirroring something that I need to improve? Right? So we'll give an example here. So let's say that I am working with a client and the client is giving me feedback that they're a little disappointed about some deliverable or something that they were expecting that I didn't provide, right? As opposed to having the reaction of like, what are you talking about? Like, I did this scope of work, right? On and on and on. Like, that's what the reaction would be. How can you not see our value? Like, let's look at the scope, like, right? The question is this experience, is this conversation actually mirroring something that I need to improve? And it might not be the deliverable. It might be, did I set clear enough expectations in that scope of work? Do my agreements, my project agreements, SOWs, whatever your business is, do my emails, do my communications need to be clearer, right? Did I leave too much gray area in the conversation last time? And how can I get better at reflecting back before I get off the call or leave the conversation? How can I get better at reflecting back? Okay, so just to level set, to reiterate, like, this is what I heard, this is what you agreed to. Does that sound right? Did I miss anything? Right? That's a great practice. That's great language. Clarify, clarify, clarify. Is this experience mirroring something that I need to improve? So you're literally saying, it's not them. The reaction is more like your own ego is getting hurt, right? So this is more about improving self-improvement. And I kind of mentioned this one within that. How could I have communicated differently? So it's not just maybe I need to improve my communication, but then dialing that a little bit deeper to say, how could I have communicated differently? Could it have been more thorough? Could we have spent a little bit more time? Did I set clear expectations? What language can I use next time in order to do that? How can we change the communication, change the language so that this doesn't happen again, right? Reframing and reflection. So you're reframing the situation and reflecting, doing a self-reflection exercise to not make it about you, because that's not what this is about, but make it about how can you show up better? How can you show up more effectively? How can you communicate more clearly? Okay. This is probably, toward the like, I am a conscious leader. I can like say that I'm a conscious leader. Toward the end of this like 7 core foundations, trusting and empowering others, very similar to servant leadership. I'm sure you've heard that term. Conscious leaders create more leaders. They don't create more followers, right? This graphic, I love this graphic. I don't know, I stole it off of Google or something, but don't do that. But I really liked this, and it was hard for me to find something that communicated it as clearly. The pyramid in the middle, this the sort of top down that we're all used to, CEO, leader at the top, then management, employees, customers, that sets your value stream. That's what we call toxic masculinity, or command and control, authoritative leadership. This basically is the entire paradigm of corporate America. We don't have to follow this. You definitely don't have to follow this because you're creating your own companies, or you're independent in such a way that you're able to do that, right? So instead of that, we look at bottom up, right? Leader at the bottom basically means that we are there supporting, as I said before, in the money follows value circle, we're there supporting our managers, supporting our employees so that they support the customers. And then the value stream actually becomes much more profitable, much more reciprocal, much more powerful, because everything that we're doing to support feels good. Think about it just from the feeling standpoint. You have fear-based leadership, and then you have support-based leadership, which is conscious leadership. Which one feels better? Regardless of where you are in the chain there, whether you're the leader or the manager or an employee or even a customer, which one feels better? Nobody wants to live in fear. We want to live in love. We want to live in support and thrive, right? So this is really what you can do. You can disrupt things to the point where you change the whole game. You have the ability to do that. Super important to understand that as a leader, you do not need to have all the answers. In fact, if you believe that you have all the answers, you're probably a pretty unconscious leader, because that means you don't trust anybody else to know more than you do. And I know that none of you on this call believe that. I think that you really value, if you're part of this community, you value the people around you. So what we're doing here is we're moving away from this individualism or these egoic tendencies where it's like, more for me. How can it be all about me, my legacy, right? We're moving away from that, and we're moving into what leads to the desire to be in service of others or to serve others, to support them. With that mindset, by the way, comes this gift of helping other people so that they can actually surpass your legacy. Again, conscious leaders create more leaders, not followers. An unconscious leader would be threatened by someone who also wanted to become a leader, right? A conscious leader would help support that person. There was an employee that I had at my agency. She was amazing. She was like, I knew she was like destined for really great things. And when she decided to leave my company, I was like, amazing. How can I support you? Can I give you a letter of recommendation? Can I you want me to talk to the new person? Like, you're on, if I could have been a stepping stone in your career, like part of my purpose has been fulfilled. Like, go do your thing. I'll find another employee and I'll train that person as well. But like the fact that she surpassed probably my legacy made me feel like $1 million, right? So that's the mindset of a conscious leader. I want to tell you a little story about, I think I have enough time to do this. Maybe I'll take a couple minutes to do this.
You got it.
There's a little story, a little parable that I heard recently on a podcast, and I'm going to change it a little bit. But I loved it because it was really this idea of like, a leader doesn't know all the answers, right? And conscious leaders create more leaders. So the story goes that there's a mystic, and the mystic is really, comfortable in the outdoors and knows the forest pretty well, and starts to kind of take this little journey and goes further and further and further out from her normal, area that she typically would wander in. And she gets lost. She's not afraid because she's familiar with the territory, but she's lost. And so days become weeks. And because of her own training and, the way that she kind of shows up in the world and she trusts herself, she's not worried about it, but she's lost. She comes out of the tree line and there's a little stream. So she's like, all right, well, I need water. So I'm going to sit down, splash some water on my face, drink some of the stream water, and I'm just going to like center. So her body posture is just like seated and relaxed, almost meditative, right? And all of a sudden, out of the other corner of the tree line comes a group of people, 7, 8 people. And they see her sitting on this log, right? And they run over. You could tell they've been exhausted. They've also been lost. And they're so excited to see her. They're like, oh my God, we've been looking for someone to help us for so long. We've been lost in the woods for like 4 days. And you're here and you can help us. And we're like so joyous. So they drink some water and, she's talking with them and she says, well, I want to tell you something. I want to be really vulnerable with you. I actually don't have the answers. I'm lost as well. But what I can do is tell you all the ways from this tree line in the directions where you should not travel, because that will lead you deeper into the forest and that will not help you. But my contention or my proposition is that we work together and we find our way out of the forest together, because you know some of the ways from there and I know some of the ways from here, and I'll, bring my expertise and we'll do it together. Now, I love this story because for me, it feels very much like what I do as a coach, right? Like I don't have all the answers. I consider myself a fairly conscious leader, healing, but I don't have all the answers, right? Like I just have some expertise to know like where not to lead you further. And I really love this story because I think it highlights like what the ways in which we should think of ourselves as leaders. Um, Knowing that together we can go further and we can find our way, I think is a really, really beautiful story. So I just wanted to share that with you because I really like it. This last part is about the greater good responsibility. I don't know if I mentioned triple bottom line earlier, but if that's a new term for you, I don't think it is, but if it is, we're talking about the idea that on an equal levels, we are prioritizing people, planet or environment, and profit. We're here to run businesses, so there has to be a profit, but the profit is, again, equal to these other two. It is not the leading indicator. It's not the thing that we focus on. So the greater good responsibility here is that through this new lens of conscious leadership, you actually might feel really called to step up. And when I say called, I mean, you might feel a real sense of like purpose, right? Regardless of what product or service or, whatever you're creating and founding in the world, you might actually start to realize that part of your purpose is greater than your own personal gains. You may even feel this like heightened sense of responsibility to positively impact people in your community, your employees, families, your industry at large, the environment, all of these things, right? And by allowing those values, your core values, to be more visible and less negotiable, that allows you to step into this this idea of being a fully conscious leader. Yes, of course, profit, super important. Uh, we don't deprioritize it. We just don't make it the thing that our metrics are based on, right? So success metrics. I love sharing this little anecdote that there was an employee that I had at my agency, Nick. Nick was one of my lead project managers. He took the job at my agency. He actually moved, he relocated from, I think he was living in New York City at the time, and I'm about 45 minutes north of there. That's where my company was. So he relocated. He ends up going out on a date, on like J date or something, with this girl, and they have a date. And he said to me, if she's vegan or she doesn't drink, I'm not having a second date with her. It turns out she was vegan and she didn't drink, and they had a second date. The story goes that they end up getting married. They now have a child together. And Nick and I became really good friends even after I sold the company. And the thing that was a success metric to me is that in the Jewish faith, there's a document, a marital document that you sign called a ketubah. I am not Jewish, so I didn't know anything about this. But apparently the bride and the groom each designate a person in their life that signs this, which is basically like attesting to the fact that they will like help them as a mentor throughout their lives, help them if they have questions about their marriage or whatever it is. But it's sort of like, this is my person. And Nick asked me to sign the ketubah before his wedding. And so I remember sitting there signing it and feeling this like incredible rush of like, oh, this is my new success metric. Like if my employee asks me to sign their marital document, like because I am this person in their life that they trust and that like I'm a mentor or a guide for them in some way, like I could almost cry about it because it still feels like that to me. Um, Success metrics need to change. It is not about profit, people. Yes, we need to pay our bills and we need to do all those things, but this like greater good and really doubling down on our people and our community and the environment and making money, like it is all possible, regardless of anyone, uh, anyone who just cannot get past it or cannot understand how that's possible. It's just because they haven't considered a different way. So thanks for letting me share that story. I love to do it. So let's wrap up and then we'll take some questions. Number 1, develop self-awareness as a daily practice. You're not going to be great at it at first. It's going to take some time. That's okay. Don't judge yourself. There's no shame in it. It is a daily practice. I still develop it every single day. You have to, right? Like we still are dealing with those traumas and those patterns and behaviors and the things that we continuously try to get out from under. Just committing to it and saying that you want to become more self-aware will actually help. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Diving inward and starting to heal those past traumas, whether that's with a conscious leadership coach, a therapist, both. I have a shadow work coach that I work with. She specializes in shadow work. If you engage with someone like that, my tip to you is also invest in Kleenex stock because the amount of crying that you will do is real, which is great because that's a release, right? That's what we're here to do, is release those things. That's what we mean when we say heal. Take care of yourself first. That martyrdom, that like self-sacrifice, it's not cute. It's not cute and it's not benefiting anybody. And if you're like, well, there's just so much work to get done and only, 24 hours in a day, you got to create better boundaries around it or set different expectations with the people who are on the end that you're delivering for, right? So take care of yourself first, put that oxygen mask on, and then you can move outward. Then you can deal with the kids and the spouse and the clients and the employees and all the things, but you are number 1. It's really important. Continuously questioning your own thoughts and feelings and words. This is like that self-reflection piece. I do this every single day. Every single day. It is definitely another part of that discipline. And then to increase collaboration with your team or the people that are in your group, contractors, affiliates, investors, whoever you're working with, trust is foundational. And trust starts with you. You have to be able to trust yourself first, then other people can trust you, right? And this last one is helping to raise others up is one of our purposes. And if you're not there quite yet, that's totally okay. And that's actually really normal. If you're still like, okay, I'm at the like self-awareness and I'm like, all right, I'm going to try this shadow work stuff. It sounds really, really messy and emotional and scary. Then you're fine. You're in a good place. You're right at the entry level. Eventually you might get to the point where like helping to support others and to raise them up becomes like your personal ethos. I think, throughout this whole journey, you can call yourself a conscious leader because it is that discipline and that lifestyle and that mindset shift. And it's going to change your whole life. So I hope that was inspirational enough. I'd love to hear what you're curious about from what I've talked about in the workshop. More than that, I'd love to hear, because a lot of people aren't always comfortable sharing questions. I'd love to hear takeaways. So what did you actually hear? And or how do you see that potentially impacting your life, or what could you even commit to out of what we're talking about here today? So I will open that up to the chat.
I just, as you were wrapping up, Kelly, I was like, yeah, Kelly just showed up here and kicked all of our asses.
With lots of love, lots of love.
Which lots of love. That's why we knew we needed you here. I'll share for me, we just did a strategy session on Monday, and I was like, we need to work on our people and planet metrics as a team, and really defining what those are. It's very easy for me to reach for, kind of the standard set of KPIs, but to work on the people and planet metrics, and that's definitely a priority for me going away. Angela shared, she had to hop off a little early, but she just said, thank you for sharing your wisdom, and thank you to the community for hosting this supportive space, and that she couldn't wait to listen to the recording and playback. There's some team members sharing they're thinking about social entrepreneurship and B Corp work as well, and how this all kind of, I feel like those kind of flow into each other for sure. Conscious leadership work and B Corp work. Alicia shared this is ass kicking in the best possible way. Yeah, Kelly, will you go into that metrics piece just a touch for me? Like, I love the storytelling there, but were there anything you tracked inside of your organization that helped kind of everyone look to those as goals beyond just the profit piece? Because I think that piece of, there's been a lot of mythology in the business world around like profit first mentality, and especially this very like, if you're being a good founder, you're thinking about your take home money first and foremost, and you're really flipping that on its head, which I love. So yeah, talk there a little.
Yeah, so one of the things that I did, I would say probably in the last 4 years of owning the agency, was there was this idea of like, we have so many meetings and so many client calls, and just like, when do we have time to do, not only do with the work, but like, when do we have like the creative space or the space for innovation? Because my agency was a cause marketing firm, which means that, we were doing ad campaigns for nonprofits and foundations and CSR initiatives for big brands. Just as much as we were developing websites and doing SEO and like all the digital marketing things, right? So creative and technology, and that's a place where you need a lot of innovation. So, one of the things that I committed to was, let's actually take Fridays off of the calendar in terms of being able to schedule any meetings. No client calls, no meetings with like anyone. The only thing that we did keep on the calendar was, because we were an agile development team, we had daily stand-ups. So 15 minutes run by Nick every single morning. We kept those for Fridays just because that was a nice way to like end out the week. The rest of those Fridays, though, were innovation days. If you had some emails to catch up on or some work that needed to get finished just because of a deadline, you could take the first half of the Friday to do that. But always Friday afternoons were innovation. You could work on anything that you wanted, whether it was personal development. Let's say someone wanted to learn JavaScript. Okay, so they were taking a JavaScript course, they were practicing something. One of my lead engineers, Kevin, developed through these innovative Friday afternoons, he developed an entire way for us to automate our entire Amazon Web Services, our AWS like hosting automation. There were things that I listened to them, I heard what they needed and what they wanted, and then gave that to them, gave them the space. And then from a success metric standpoint, it was like, what have you learned? Right? It wasn't about how many hours you put in or whatever. It was like, what have you learned? Is this a new skill that you've developed? Where do you want to go next? Is this helping to up level you as a person, as an employee? Is it helping the company in any way? Right? Because there's lots of ways to do this. I think you have to like listen to your people and figure out what are the things that are calling to them, what's important to them, because every culture is different. Like what I just shared might be totally not interesting to another agency, right? So I think you just have to like have those conversations with your people, with your team, figure out, okay, what is it that you actually need in order to feel supported? How can we enact that? And then I wouldn't call it measurement. What I would call it is success metrics. How are we going to talk about this? What would signify to us or signal to us that this initiative has been successful? And so each one of them created their own success metrics. Like, so the person who wanted to learn JavaScript, it was like, well, when I'm able to code something in JavaScript by hand and execute something, an animation, for example, like that would be my first success metric, right? So I actually put that on them as opposed to me, again, top down leadership, me defining what those success metrics were. I empowered them to create those success metrics. And if you think about it, like, what did that actually do for my company? Those people were incredibly loyal. They were like, this is the best company in the world. Like, I still get DMs in Instagram from some of my employees. They're like, you're the greatest boss ever. And, on an egoic level, it does feel good. But it was because I listened to them and I didn't care so much about tracking profitability per employee, how many hours they were spending on. It's like, listen, at some point we just have to like let go a little bit. I'm obviously, as an agency coach, I'm very keen on tracking time, and because you have to do that in order to understand your profit margins. But I think that there's a middle ground. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's another example.
It was great. I really appreciate that. And I really, the insight of, being able to let the team kind of define what success looks like, and then sharing that success back. I love that. We had a couple other shares that others try and carve out time on Fridays for themselves. No meeting Fridays seems to be increasingly popular, particularly as we get into the summer season and everybody just wants that 3-day weekend. So
I
love
do
that.
see a lot of companies doing that for the summer. My challenge to that would be, if you can do it for 3 or 4 months, why can't you do it for 12?
Totally.
I think it's there's no judgment around it, but like, if you're not doing it at all, start with the summers. Um, if you're doing it already, challenge yourself to actually do it all year round.
Yeah, I
This
agree.
goes
I
back to
agree.
the slowing down, right? Like that slowing down is not just for leaders. It's like slowing down, pausing, ruminating, seeing how you can get your people to be more creative, more innovative, just to think a little bit more in the being energy versus the doing energy, less about execution, more about strategy, thinking, reflecting, all of that. It's so important. It's the way that we get faster, further.
I can't agree with you more on that one. Aldrin,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a good part of that is trust too, like trust in yourself and trust in your team, and trust that you did the work of hiring the team that you need to get the work done too. So if you feel like you can trust yourself that you did that, and you can trust your team, then there's like no reason not to, give them the creative freedom that's needed, like every Friday, or whatever you set as a team.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I do have some book recommendations that I mentioned earlier. So let me see if I can do this. Oh, there we go. So this is not an exhaustive list. I'm currently reading How to Do the Work by Nicole LePera, but I've pretty much read every other one on here. These are not, I would say some of them could be considered entry level. Maybe like the first row, we'll call that entry level. The second row is a little bit more in depth, a little bit more advanced. If I would recommend just 2 out of these 7 to start with, it would be How to Do the Work and Bring Yourself. Bring Yourself by Morey Taherapour. She was actually a mentor of mine. She's a instructor at Wharton School of Business. She is like the country's foremost authority on negotiation. And the interesting thing, she's actually become a good friend of mine as well. But the interesting thing about negotiation is that the whole book is about self-worth and self-value. So, if part of your struggle or part of your challenge with owning the business or the organization that you're owning or founding is like, how do we price our services? Or I wonder if the way that we're priced is like commensurate with the value that we're providing. I would challenge you to, or invite you rather, to read this book. So How to Do the Work is more like how to do the trauma healing self-awareness work. And then this is like self-value. So I think those are the 2 ones that I would say, get those first, And then you can go into, and honestly, I have one here from Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, but literally you could get any book that Brene Brown has written, and I would put it on this list as well.
We were just, Aljan and I are in the chat, like, okay, screenshot all these. We're gonna start sending some of them to this community.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been fantastic, Kelly. I just want to echo all the gratitude that we're seeing in the chat for you and for this work. Everyone is just so grateful for the wisdom you have to offer us. And I am so grateful you said yes to coming and teaching our community. And I want to encourage everyone to please go find and follow Kelly's work. Her newsletters are amazing. Her Instagram is amazing. Her podcast is fantastic. If you want to listen to her, teach more, that's a great place to get amazing free insight from her. And she came on our podcast, so there's an episode there where we feature her. But Kelly, just so grateful.
You're very welcome. It was really my pleasure. Thanks for indulging me and let me talk about, like, literally my favorite thing in the world to talk about. I could go on for hours about this stuff. And remember, this is really just like very much kind of grazing the surface. Yes, there are some things here that are actionable, but a lot of this is really like at your own pace, on your own terms, to your own comfort level. And wherever you are in that process, like, just celebrate it, because there are so many people who are creating businesses really not from the best place. And I think a community like this, where you're incubating more of that, like natural conscious leadership, or the interest in conscious leadership, commitment to conscious leadership, I think it's really beautiful. And it's like literally what the world needs right now. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Kelly. And I want to just encourage everyone as you sign off, if this was a session that really resonated with you, always go to your member portal for playback, share in Slack, the things that you've learned or you take forward or experience after this session. And always tell a friend too, if there's somebody who could have benefited from this session, they can still get access to it if they join and go into the member portal. So thank you all for being here with us today. Thank you again to Kelly. Take care, everyone. We'll be seeing you soon.